Olive Oatman, the returned captive, photographed in 1857. Olive had been captured by the Yavapai at age 12 in 1851, then sold to the Mojave, who tattooed her face with markings. Rescued in 1856, she became one of the most famous captivity stories of the Southwest. She married, had children, and lived peacefully to age 65. A musical band poses in front of Bridal Veil Falls in Telluride, Colorado in September 1886, photographed by Charles Goodman. The presence of a band in this remote mining town reveals that cultural life in Wild West towns was richer than films suggest, with music, theater, and community celebrations being common occurrences. View of Main Street in Coulson, Montana in 1882. Coulson was a Montana ghost town that briefly flourished as a crossing point on the Yellowstone River before being swallowed by the growth of nearby Billings. Coulson's history is typical of the ephemeral frontier towns that sprang up and disappeared rapidly in the West. Paiute men, women, and children pose in rows under a tree near Cottonwood Springs in Washoe County, Nevada, in 1870. This documentary photograph preserves a rare moment of Paiute community life during a period when American colonization was increasingly threatening the lands and resources of Great Basin peoples. Bat Masterson, photographed around 1900 to 1910. By the turn of the century, Masterson had left behind his life as a Wild West lawman and gunfighter and was becoming a sports journalist in New York. He was one of the few survivors of the golden age of Dodge City who made a successful transition to the modern world. Larry Deger was a lawman in Dodge City, Kansas, famous for his imposing stature of 6 feet 4 inches and approximately 275 pounds. Wyatt Earp began his career in Dodge City working under Deger's command. The Dodge City police force, despite its reputation, genuinely attempted to maintain some form of order in the turbulent town. Judge Roy Bean's saloon, called the Jersey Lily, in Langtry, Texas, around 1900. Bean called himself the law west of the Pecos and served as a justice of the peace using highly unorthodox methods. He named his saloon after British actress Lily Langtry, of whom he was an avowed fan, though he never actually met her. In 1893, a 2-story hotel was moved 72 kilometers from Dimmitt in Castro County to Plainview in Hale County. This extraordinary logistical feat, accomplished before modern trucks, demonstrates the creativity and determination of Western settlers who recycled entire structures rather than rebuild them from scratch at new locations. Bill Tilghman, Marshal of Dodge City in the early 1880s and Chief of Police of Oklahoma City from 1911 to 1913, photographed around 1912. Tilghman was one of the most respected lawmen of the American Wild West, whose career spanned the transition from the frontier to organized states with modern law enforcement institutions. Pearl Hart at the Yuma Territorial Prison, Arizona, in 1899. Pearl was one of the last stagecoach robbers of the Wild West. Her boldness in holding up a stagecoach in Arizona in 1899 made her an instant celebrity. She served her sentence at Yuma and then disappeared from history, her final whereabouts unknown. Buffalo Bill and his estranged wife, Lulu. William Cody and Louisa Frederici married in 1866, but their union was marked by long absences and disagreements. Buffalo Bill attempted divorce in 1904 but failed. The two remained officially married until Cody's death in 1917, though they had lived separately for decades. Facade of the Western Hotel in Chico, California, around 1885. Chico was a prosperous town in Northern California, founded in 1860 by General John Bidwell. The Western Hotel represents the type of lodging establishment that served travelers, merchants, and adventurers moving through the California West. View of Flagstaff, Arizona, in 1885. At that time, Flagstaff was a young town growing rapidly along the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, benefiting from the Ponderosa pine timber industry and trade with the Navajo and Hopi communities of the plateau. The transition from frontier town to established city is visible in the image. Women and children of the De La Guerra family on the courtyard veranda of their home in Santa Barbara, California, around 1875. The De La Guerra family was one of the oldest and most prominent California families of Spanish origin. This family portrait preserves the memory of the pre-American Californian aristocracy, Geronimo at right and his warriors, Yanoja, Geronimo's brother-in-law, Chapo, his son by his second wife, and Fun, Chapo's half-brother. This photograph shows the Chiricahua group that resisted American colonization longest, becoming a worldwide symbol of indigenous resistance in the American Southwest. Antoine Moise, called Grizzly Door, and Michael, two young Salish men from the Flathead Indian Reservation in western Montana, seated on a striped blanket. This photograph captures two young men in a relaxed pose that reveals the everyday humanity behind the formal images that generally documented indigenous American peoples. Billy the Kid's forgotten ally, Martin Chavez, at left, and his son-in-law Francisco Santana inside their store in Picacho, New Mexico, around 1880. Chavez was one of Billy the Kid's most loyal allies during the Lincoln County War, but was largely ignored by popular history focused on Anglo-American characters. The Reno brothers carried out the first robbery of a moving train in United States history in October 1866 in Jackson County, Indiana, 159 years ago. The Reno brothers' innovative crime inspired decades of train robberies across the American West, becoming the specialty of criminals like Jesse James and countless imitators. Guarding 500 pounds of gold amalgam at Cottonwood Placers on September 8, 1897, photographed by Thomas Michael McKee. Amalgam was a mixture of mercury and gold used in the mining process to extract the precious metal from ore. Guarding gold shipments was a high-risk activity throughout the Wild West era. The American Cowboy Show poses for a photograph at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. The Columbian Exposition, held to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas, was the setting for Frederick Jackson Turner's famous speech about the closing of the American frontier and its role in shaping democracy. Photograph from the early 1880s showing a mule pack train hauling ore from a Tombstone mine. Mule transport was essential in the mountainous regions of the Southwest before the arrival of railroads. Mules, more resilient than horses in difficult terrain, were indispensable pack animals throughout the mining era of the West. The Orland Osgood Saloon in Carter County, Montana, in 1905. Carter County was only established in 1917, so in 1905 this region was still unorganized territory. Orland Osgood Saloon was typical of the establishments that served small communities of ranchers and cowboys in the most remote reaches of Montana. View of settlers in Oklahoma, shown approximately around 1800 in the original caption, but likely depicting the late 19th century opening of Oklahoma lands during the famous land runs that opened Indian Territory to American settlement between 1889 and 1895, transforming the region completely within a few short years. Ed Masterson, brother of Bat Masterson, photographed in Dodge City around 1878. Ed served as city marshal of Dodge City and was shot and killed in March 1878 by drunken cowboys he was attempting to disarm. His death deeply affected Bat Masterson and shaped the younger brother's relentless attitude toward criminals. African-American cowgirl Nellie Brown and her horse, around 1900 to 1915. Nellie Brown represents the black women who participated in Wild West cowboy culture, frequently made invisible by popular history. black women in the West faced both racism and sexism, but many prospered and contributed significantly despite those barriers. The railroad arrives and ends the stagecoach era in Deadwood, South Dakota in 1890. This photograph captures a symbolic moment of transition, the last Deadwood stagecoach service being replaced by the train. The arrival of railroads in Wild West towns marked the end of one era and the beginning of an entirely different one. View of a street in Creede, Colorado in 1892. Creede was Colorado's last great silver boom, attracting thousands of prospectors and adventurers in the 1890s. The town was so lively that poet Cy Warman wrote, "It's day all day in the daytime, and there is no night in Creede," capturing its relentless and feverish energy. View of the Old West of Compton, California in 1886. Compton, known today primarily for its urban culture, was in 1886 a recently established farming community in Southern California. The region had been settled by farmers from the east and still maintained the frontier character typical of the California West of that era. Wild Bill Hickok in Springfield, Missouri, around 1864, wearing a belt with an eagle plate and a revolver. This image shows Hickok early in his career before becoming legendary. In Springfield, Hickok killed Davis Tutt in a public duel in July 1865, which many historians consider the first true Wild West street duel. Las Gorras Blancas, a group of Hispanic vigilantes formed to fight land theft in New Mexico. This Night Rider group, active in the late 1880s, cut fences and destroyed property of Anglo-Americans who had illegally seized Spanish and Mexican land grant territories belonging to established Hispanic communities in the territory. Interior of a saloon in Butte County, California, around 1903. Butte County in Northern California was a gold mining center during the 1850 rush. By 1903, the region had settled into a more diversified economy, but saloons continued to serve as social centers for rural communities throughout the California countryside. The Rath and Wright Buffalo Hide Yard in Dodge City, Kansas, in 1878, showing 40,000 buffalo hides. This iconic photograph documents the devastating result of commercial buffalo hunting that nearly drove the species to extinction and destroyed the economic and spiritual foundation of the Plains Native nations during the 1870s. A stagecoach on Franklin Street in Santa Clara, California, in 1858. This rare photograph captures life in California just 8 years after its admission as an American state. Stagecoaches were the primary means of public transport in California before railroad expansion, connecting towns and dispersed communities across the state. The photograph that led to the downfall of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. A lawman recognized the outlaws in the image and delivered it to the Pinkerton Agency. This group photograph was taken at a studio in Fort Worth and ended up being distributed as a wanted poster, precipitating Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid's flight to South America. Commodore Perry Owens was a legendary lawman of the Arizona Territory, known for his role in the Pleasant Valley War, the bloodiest range war of the Wild West. In September 1887, standing alone at a doorway, he killed 3 men and wounded a 4th in one of the most extraordinary acts of individual bravery in frontier law enforcement. Virgil Earp and his daughters in Portland, Oregon, in the spring of 1898. After the violent events in Tombstone and Wyatt's Vendetta campaign, Virgil moved to various western cities. His left arm, permanently compromised by the 1881 ambush, did not prevent him from continuing his career as a lawman across the West. Crapper Jack's Saloon in Cripple Creek, Colorado, around 1895 to 1899. Cripple Creek was one of the world's largest gold mining districts during this period and attracted all manner of characters. The saloon's unusual name reflects the irreverent humor that was common in Wild West mining towns throughout the American frontier. Geronimo departing for Florida from Fort Bowie, Arizona in September 1886. After his final surrender to General Nelson Miles, Geronimo and the last free Chiricahua were sent as prisoners of war to Fort Pickens in Florida, far from their Arizona homeland. He would never again live as a free man on his ancestral lands. Cowboys drinking in a saloon in Tascosa, Texas in 1907. Located in Oldham County, Tascosa was one of the leading towns of the Texas Panhandle in the 1880s. The site where the town stood is now called Cal Farley's Boys Ranch. Tascosa is today a ghost town in the western Texas Panhandle, largely forgotten by history. The James Younger Gang was the most celebrated of all Wild West outlaw bands. Their bold bank and train robberies made them legends during their own lifetime. The gang survived for nearly 16 years until the failure of the Northfield, Minnesota bank raid in September 1876, which practically destroyed the entire group. View of Main Street in Helena, Montana, between 1870 and 1874. Helena was founded in 1864 as a gold mining camp and grew rapidly to become the territorial and later state capital of Montana. In the 1870s, Helena was one of the wealthiest cities per capita in the United States, thanks to its remarkable gold mining wealth. Charles A. Siringo was a cowboy, Pinkerton detective, and author, photographed seated with a cane and firearm around 1900. Siringo spent years as a detective pursuing Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, and later wrote several books about his Wild West adventures, becoming one of the most popular memoir writers of the frontier era. The tombstone of Shoot 'em Up Jake at Boot Hill Cemetery in Dodge City, Kansas. Boot Hill was Dodge City's original cemetery, where those who died with their boots on, meaning in armed confrontation, were buried. Shoot 'em Up. Jake's colorful nickname captures the dark humor with which Wild West inhabitants faced death. Homesteaders in Nebraska in 1888. The Homestead Act of 1862 granted 160 acres of public land to any American citizen willing to farm it for 5 years. Thousands of families migrated to Nebraska and other Plains states seeking this free land, facing extreme isolation, devastating droughts, and brutal winters of the Great Plains. Armed escort in the Sierra Nevada mountains around 1900. Armed escorts were common in the Sierras, where the dangers of banditry and the natural risks of mountain crossings demanded protection. This image captures the constant vigilance needed to protect travelers and valuable cargo moving through the dangerous mountain terrain. The Circle City Saloon in Nome, Alaska, around 1902. Nome was founded during the 1899 Klondike Gold Rush and quickly became one of Alaska's largest cities. The Circle City Saloon was typical of the establishments that sprang up in these mining towns, serving populations of adventurers arriving from around the entire world. The blacksmith shop at the Silver King Mine in Arizona in 1876. Silver King was one of the richest silver mines in Arizona, located near Superior. Blacksmith shops were essential to mining operations, manufacturing and repairing the tools, rails, and equipment that kept 19th-century American mines in continuous operation. Captain Jack Crawford, born 1847 and died 1917, known as the Poet Scout, was an American adventurer, educator, and author, as well as a frontier scout, photographed in 1881. Crawford wrote poetry and plays about Wild West life and became a popular figure at cultural performances and public events of the frontier era. A group of American Army soldiers and Apache scouts stopped momentarily at a watering hole while pursuing Geronimo in 1886. This rare photograph captures the complexity of southwestern military campaigns in which Apache scouts frequently pursued other Apache. The final campaign against Geronimo involved 5,000 American soldiers. In 1881, Bat Masterson fought in his last gunfight in Dodge City, Kansas. Although he had spent years as a Wild West lawman and gunfighter, Masterson eventually moved to New York, where he became a sports journalist and popular columnist, living until 1921 in a life completely different from his violent frontier youth.